The snow didn't just fall, it smothered the world. It erased the prairie, silenced the wind, and pressed against Amelia Whitford's small cabin like a ghost trying to get in. Inside, the fire was dying. The shadows in the corners grew longer, reaching for her. Amelia was 23, but the loneliness in her eyes was 100 years old. A year ago, her husband had died, and the town had buried him with prayers and then buried her with whispers. A young widow was a problem, a temptation. So she became a ghost in her own life, and the silence of her cabin was the only friend she had left. The knock on the door came like a gunshot, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't the sound of a neighbor seeking shelter. It was the sound of fate arriving. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She fumbled with the latch, and the storm exploded inside, a blast of ice and wind that stole her breath. And there he stood. He was a giant of a man, shirtless in the blizzard, his chest a wall of bronze muscle. His long dark hair was streaked with white, as if the storm itself was woven into it. His eyes were dark, hard, and held no apology. In his arms, wrapped in frayed blankets, were two newborn babies, their cries so thin they were almost lost in the wind. Amelia couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. It was a fever dream. Then the giant spoke, his voice like rocks grinding together. "You need a husband," he said. It wasn't a question. "And my daughters need a mother." He took one step inside and his sighs filled the world. He smelled of pine and snow and something ancient, something wild. He didn't ask permission. He just stated a fact. Amelia's mind reeled. The town's voices screamed in her head. She's a scandal. She has no protector. And now an Apache warrior stood on her hearth, offering not just a bargain, but a destiny she couldn't possibly comprehend. Her gaze fell on the infants. Their tiny fists were blue with cold. Their cries were getting weaker. Something inside her, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, woke up. Against every rule, against every fear, she stepped back and pulled the door wider. "Come in," she whispered, and the storm followed him inside. He knelt by the fire, not asking for help, and unwrapped one of the babies, holding its tiny cold body toward the flames. The child's whimper softened, just a little. Amelia stood frozen, a thousand questions burning on her tongue. Who was he? Where was their mother? And why, of all the cabins on this lonely prairie, had he come to hers? She said nothing. Instead, she added a log to the fire. The flames leaped up, casting a golden light on the stranger's hard face. As he touched one of the infant's cheeks, his fingers, scarred and powerful, were impossibly gentle. In that moment, she saw past the warrior. She saw the grief in the white streaks of his hair. She saw a loneliness that mirrored her own. "The town will not accept this," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. The man didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the twins. He spoke a single word, his voice low and certain. "Let them." And in that word, Amelia heard a challenge, a promise of a storm far worse than the one howling outside her door. She had just led a war into her home, but she didn't know yet if he was the soldier or if he was the prize. For 3 days, the world was nothing but white. Snow piled in drifts that buried the windows, turning the cabin into a small, dim cave. The fire was their sun, their only defense against the crushing cold. His name was Greyhawk. He spoke at once and never again. He moved with a quiet efficiency, hauling wood, his bare feet seeming to make no sound on the floorboards. Amelia tended to the twins, Etta and Mercy. Their cries were the only music in the suffocating silence. She would rock them, hum old hymns, and feel Greyhawk's eyes on her from across the room. It wasn't judgment in his gaze. It was something else, something she couldn't name, something that felt dangerously like gratitude. When the storm finally broke, the world was blindingly white. Amelia knew she had to go to town for supplies. She pulled on her cloak, and when she opened the door, a freshly killed deer was hanging from the porch beam. He had gone out in the blizzard, barefoot, and returned with food. He had provided. He expected no thanks. The walk to town was a walk toward a firing squad. She felt the stares before she saw them. The whispers followed her like stray dogs. The bell on the general store door was an alarm, announcing her arrival. The room went quiet. Ruth Calder, the banker's wife, was the first to speak, her voice like cracking ice. Well, look what the storm blew in. We thought you'd frozen solid out there with your company. Amelia's cheeks burned. She ignored them, moving to the flour sacks. Jeb Rollins, a man whose cruelty was a town sport, stepped in her path. Tell us, Amelia, does he speak or does he just grunt? What business does a woman like you have with a savage? I came for supplies, she said, her voice steady. Not gossip. Ruth laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Supplies? I suppose you're feeding his half-breed brats now, too. The word brats struck Amelia like a slap. Her hand tightened on the counter, her knuckles white. She wanted to scream, to throw the cruelty back in their faces. But she held it in. She paid for her things and walked out, her back straight, their laughter chasing her down the street. When she returned to the cabin, Greyhawk was splitting logs. He saw the look on her face, the shame and the anger she was trying to hide. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. Later, as she was rocking Ida, he came and stood beside her. He said nothing, just placed a small, crudely carved wooden bird in her lap. Her breath caught in her throat. The simple gift was a question and an answer all at once. It said, I see you. I know. She looked up at him, and in the deepening shadows of the cabin, she realized a terrifying truth. The town's hatred wasn't just random cruelty. It was specific. It was aimed at her. And somehow this silent stranger at her hearth knew exactly why. The whispers from town began to follow her home. Some nights she thought she could hear them on the wind, the faint, mocking sound of Ruth's laughter. She started barring the door at sunset, a new fear coiling in her gut. One evening, as she was singing a lullaby to Mercy, Greyhawk crossed the room and stopped behind her chair. His shadow fell over her, and she faltered, the song dying in her throat. They talk about your husband, he said, his voice quiet but clear. Amelia stiffened. My husband is dead. He was a good man, Greyhawk continued, as if she hadn't spoken. He was an honest man. That is a dangerous thing to be in that town. Amelia turned to look up at him, her heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm. How would you know? You never met him. For a long moment, Greyhawk was silent. He looked down at the sleeping twins in their cradle. My wife, he said, the words heavy with a grief that was still raw. She was a white woman. Her name was Sarah. The revelation hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. A white woman. She grew up in this valley, Greyhawk said, his eyes distant. Her family disowned her when she chose me. We made a life for ourselves in the mountains. We were happy. His voice broke on the last word. What happened to her? Amelia whispered, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. She died giving birth to them, he said, gesturing to the twins. But it was not the birth that killed her. He looked at Amelia, his eyes burning with an intensity that pinned her to the chair. Your husband found her. She was trying to get to town, to a doctor. She collapsed on the trail. He found her, tried to help her. But it was too late. Before she died, she told him everything. Told him what? Amelia was barely breathing. She told him about the gold. The word hung in the air, shimmering and deadly. There is a gold claim in these hills, Greyhawk explained. It belonged to Sarah's father. After he died, Jeb Rollins and the banker, Ruth's husband, they forged the deed. They stole it from her. They've been secretly mining it for years, getting rich while the rest of this town starves. Amelia's mind raced. It made a horrible kind of sense. The banker's new house, Jeb's fine horses, the way they ran the town like their own private kingdom. Sarah found the original deed, Greyhawk said. She was bringing it to your husband. She trusted him. He was the only one in town who treated her with kindness. And when they found out, Amelia whispered, the pieces clicking together with sickening finality. They killed him. Greyhawk nodded slowly. They made it look like a hunting accident, but your husband wasn't a clumsy man. He was murdered, to keep him quiet. And Sarah? They hunted her down like an animal. She was already weak from the birthing. They left her to die on the trail. They never knew she'd had the twins. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. They never knew she'd already passed the deed to your husband, and your husband, he had just enough time to hide it before they came for him. Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her entire life, the story of her husband's death, the town's pity, it was all a lie built on a foundation of greed and murder. "Where is it?" she asked. "The deed." "I don't know," Greyhawk admitted. "Your husband hid it somewhere in this cabin. I came here to find it. I came here for justice." He had used her. The realization was a cold knife in her gut. He had come to her cabin not for shelter, but for a piece of paper. But then she looked at his face, at the raw pain etched there. She looked at the two motherless babies sleeping in their cradle, and she knew this was about more than just a secret. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the night, the sharp, frantic barking of a fox, followed by the splintering of wood. Greyhawk was at the window in an instant, peering through a crack in the shutters. "They're here," he said, his voice flat. "Rollins and three others, and they've set fire to the barn." Amelia's blood ran cold. The barn. Her husband had stored his papers there, his journals, everything. If the deed was in there. But before she could even process that thought, another, more terrifying realization hit her. The barn wasn't just a barn. It was a message. They hadn't come for a piece of paper. They had come to erase the evidence. All of it, including the two people who now knew the truth. The barn burned with a terrible, hungry roar. Orange flames clawed at the night sky, sending a river of black smoke across the snow. Jeb Rollins and his men were shadows against the inferno, their faces lit with triumphant glee. "Come on out, Whitford," Jeb bellowed. "We just want to talk to your guest." The lie was so bald it was almost funny. Greyhawk didn't hesitate. He scooped the twins, one under each arm, their small bodies still wrapped in blankets. He looked at Amelia. "The root cellar," he said. "There's a tunnel. It leads to the creek bed. Your husband showed it to me once." Her husband. He had known Greyhawk. He had been part of this. The secrets were stacked one on top of another. There was no time. The heat from the burning barn was already pressing against the cabin walls. Amelia threw open the trap door in the floor, revealing a small, dark hole. The air that rose from it was cold and smelled of damp earth. She scrambled down the rickety ladder, and Greyhawk passed the twins down to her. "Go," he commanded. "I will follow." But he didn't. He closed the trapdoor over her head, plunging her into darkness. She heard the heavy scrape of the kitchen table being dragged over it. He wasn't following. He was staying behind. He was going to face them alone. "No!" she screamed, her voice swallowed by the earth. She could hear the muffled sounds of the cabin door being broken down, the shouts of men, the roar of a struggle. She clutched the twins to her chest, their terrified whimpers the only sound in her suffocating black world. She had to move. She had to trust him. She stumbled through the tunnel, her hands outstretched, feeling her way through the cold, narrow passage. It seemed to go on forever. Above her, she could hear the muffled sounds of a fight, a terrible symphony of breaking furniture and grunts of pain. And then, silence. A silence that was more terrifying than the noise. She finally saw it, a faint patch of gray light ahead, the end of the tunnel. She scrambled out into the pre-dawn light, emerging from a tangle of roots on the bank of a frozen creek. She was covered in dirt, her dress torn, her heart a raw, bleeding thing in her chest. She looked back toward the cabin. The barn was a black, skeletal ruin. The cabin itself was untouched, but four men were dragging a figure out the front door. It was Greyhawk. His arms were bound. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, but he was walking on his own 2 feet, his head held high. Jeb Rollins shoved him forward, laughing. They were taking him to town, to the sheriff, to a hangman's noose. They had their scapegoat, the savage who had come in the night and caused all this trouble. The story was already written, and no one would believe her if she told a different one. She had to get away, for the twins. She turned to run, to disappear into the wilderness. But then she saw it, lying on the ground near the tunnel exit, half hidden by a rock. A small, leather-bound book, her husband's journal. He must have dropped it, or left it for her. Her hands shaking, she opened it. The last entry was written in a hurried, frantic scrawl. "They know. Jeb was just here. He knows I helped Sarah. He knows about the deed. I told him it was in the barn, in the old chest. A lie. It's safer where no one would ever think to look. The place she loved most. Amelia's breath caught. The place she loved most. She knew. Her mother's rose garden, a small, neglected patch of earth behind the cabin, where a single, stubborn rose bush still bloomed in the summer. Under the loose hearthstone, the deed was still in the cabin, and Greyhawk was buying her time. A new strength, cold and hard as iron, flooded through her. She looked at the two infants in her arms, their faces pale in the morning light. She looked toward the town, where the man who had saved them was being marched to his death. She was done with silence. She was done with being a victim. She straightened her shoulders, a plan forming in her mind. A desperate, impossible plan. The town wanted a show. She would give them one. She found the town in a fever. Jeb Rollins was a hero, a man who had faced down the savage and saved them all. Greyhawk was locked in the sheriff's jail, awaiting the circuit judge who was, conveniently, due to arrive the next day. A trial was set. A verdict was already decided. Amelia didn't go to the cabin. It was too dangerous. Instead, she went to the one place no one would expect her to go. She went to Ruth Calder. She found the banker's wife in her pristine home, a place of polished wood and cold, empty rooms. "Get out!" Ruth hissed, her face a mask of contempt. "No," Amelia said, her voice quiet but unshakable. She held up the journal. "My husband kept very detailed records, Ruth, about everything, including the loans your husband made to him, loans that were forgiven in exchange for his silence about certain business dealings." Ruth's face went pale. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Amelia took a step closer. "My husband knew about the gold. He knew you and Jeb stole that land, and he knew you killed Greyhawk's wife to keep her quiet." The truth, when spoken aloud, was a powerful weapon. Ruth stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat. "I have the proof," Amelia said, though she had no such thing, just a desperate bluff. "And I will show it to the judge tomorrow, unless you help me." "Help you?" Ruth spat. "Why would I help you?" "Because when this all comes out, Jeb Rollins will not go down alone. He will drag you and your husband down with him, and you will lose everything." She let the words hang in the air. "Or you can tell me what I need to know, and I will make sure your name is never mentioned." Fear and self-preservation warred in Ruth's eyes. Finally, greed won. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want to know Jeb's weakness," Amelia said. "Every man has one." Ruth's lips curled into a cruel smile. "He has a daughter, illegitimate, a half Apache girl he keeps hidden away in a cabin up in the North Woods. No one knows about her. If that got out, it would ruin his reputation. His wife would leave him. He would lose everything." The hypocrisy was staggering, but it was exactly what Amelia needed. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Greyhawk stood before the judge, chained, his face bruised but his expression defiant. Jeb Rollins sat in the front row, basking in the town's admiration. The prosecutor laid out the case. The savage had attacked the barn, tried to kill Jeb and his brave men. It was an open and shut case. "Does the defense have anything to say?" the judge asked, his tone bored. "I do," a voice called from the back. Every head turned. Amelia walked down the aisle, the twins in her arms. A gasp went through the crowd. "This man is innocent," she declared, her voice ringing through the silent room. "And I can prove it." She laid her husband's journal on the judge's bench. "This is my husband's journal. In it, he details the conspiracy to steal the Sunstone gold claim from Greyhawk's wife, a conspiracy led by Jeb Rollins." Jeb leapt to his feet. "She's lying. The woman is hysterical." "Am I?" Amelia turned to face him, her eyes burning. "Then perhaps you can explain these." She pulled a stack of letters from her cloak. Letters from Jeb to his forgotten Apache lover. Letters detailing his secret daughter. Letters provided by a very cooperative Ruth Calder. Jeb's face turned the color of ash. "And there is the matter of the original deed," Amelia continued, her voice rising. "The one my husband hid. He hid it where no one would ever look, under the hearthstone of my mother's rose garden." The sheriff, who had been standing by looking uneasy, suddenly went rigid. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd been part of it all along. "It's over, Jeb," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with defeat. He had seen which way the wind was blowing. It's all over. Jeb Rollins didn't surrender. He let out a roar of pure rage and lunged, not at Amelia, but at Greyhawk, pulling a hidden knife from his boot. But he never reached him. A single shot rang out, not from the sheriff, but from the back of the courtroom. Ruth Calder stood there, a small lady's pistol in her hand, smoke curling from the barrel. "No one," she said, her voice cold and clear, "is dragging my husband down with him." Jeb collapsed to the floor, and in the stunned silence that followed, justice, in its own strange and terrible way, had finally been served. In the aftermath, the truth came out. A flood that washed the town clean. The deed was recovered. The gold claim was legally signed over to Greyhawk's daughters. The corrupt banker was ruined. The sheriff resigned in disgrace, and Amelia Whitford was no longer the lonely widow. She was a woman who had faced down a mob and spoken the truth, a woman who had fought for what was right. A few weeks later, as spring finally came to the prairie, she stood on her porch, watching Greyhawk play with the twins in the sunshine. The wooden bird he had carved sat on the porch rail, a silent guardian. He looked up and saw her watching. He walked over, the twins babbling in his arms. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stood before her, his eyes full of a quiet, profound respect. A respect that was returned in her own gaze. He had come to her in a storm, a stranger bringing chaos and danger. But he had also brought her a gift she never knew she needed. He had brought her back to life, and she, in turn, had given him back his future. Together, on that small patch of land that had seen so much sorrow, they began to build a new life. A family forged not by blood, but by courage. A family that proved that even in the harshest of winters, hope, like a stubborn rose, could find a way to bloom. If this story about how a single act of courage can change everything resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. We love hearing how these tales of the frontier connect with you, wherever you are in the world. And if you want more stories of justice, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.